Rolex. If you've ever wondered who controls luxury watchmaking without answering to a single shareholder, meet Rolex, the company that's basically structured as a charity but makes $10 billion a year. Sounds ridiculous, right? Founded in 1905 by Hans Wilsdorf in London, Rolex didn't start in Switzerland. Wilsdorf was a visionary who understood that the future of watches wasn't pocket watches, it was wristwatches. At the time, wristwatches were considered unreliable and feminine. Wilsdorf said, "Hold my champagne," and created the Oyster, the world's first waterproof wristwatch in 1926. Suddenly, watches weren't fragile jewelry, they were tools. By the 1950s and 60s, Rolex was conquering professional markets. Submariner for divers in 1953, GMT Master for pilots in 1954, Daytona for racers in 1963. They weren't flashy marketing campaigns, they were purpose-built instruments tested in the real world. Jacques Cousteau dove with a submariner. Edmund Hillary summited Everest, wearing a Rolex. These weren't endorsements, they were proof of concept. But here's where it gets interesting. When Wilsdorf died in 1960, he left the entire company to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a private trust in Geneva. This structure means Rolex has zero shareholders, zero public accountability, and zero pressure to maximize short-term profits. They answer to no one. And they've used that freedom to build something no other watch brand has: total vertical integration. In 2004, Rolex bought Egler, their movement supplier, bringing caliber production fully in-house. They own their own gold foundries. They manufacture their own 904L oyster steel, a corrosion-resistant alloy so difficult to machine that almost no other brand bothers. They make their own dials, hands, bracelets, sapphire crystals, even the lubricants for their movements. Every single component controlled. It's like if Apple made its own chips, screens, batteries, and even mined its own minerals. Oh wait, Apple's trying to do that now. Rolex has been doing it for decades. But the real genius? Artificial scarcity. Rolex produces around 1 million watches per year. Demand 3 to 4 times that. The result is multi-year waiting lists for steel sports models. Authorized dealers have been caught flipping Submariners and Daytonas on the gray market for double retail. And Rolex doesn't stop it. The scarcity isn't a bug. It's the entire strategy. When you can't have something, you want it more. Rolex weaponized that psychology better than any luxury brand in history. Today, Rolex generates around $10 billion annually. And because they're a foundation, they reinvest profits into the company and charitable causes. No shareholders, no stock price, just pure, patient watchmaking dominance. Patek Philippe. What if we told you that one of the most expensive watch brands on earth still runs like a family business from the 1800s? No corporate overlords, no quarterly earnings pressure, just a family making watches at their own pace. That's Patek Philippe, and here's why they're untouchable. Founded in 1839 in Geneva by Antoine Norbert de Patek and Adrien Philippe, Patek became the watchmaker for European royalty. Queen Victoria owned one. Albert Einstein owned one. Their watches weren't just timepieces, they were complications masterpieces, perpetual calendars, minute repeaters, tourbillons. If it was mechanically impressive, Patek did it first or did it best. In 1932, the Stern family bought the company during the Great Depression. Today, Thierry Stern, fourth generation, runs it. And because they're private, they operate with a freedom that publicly traded companies can only dream of. They produce around 60,000 watches per year. Not because they can't make more, because they choose not to. Patek intentionally limits supply to maintain exclusivity. Some models have 10-year waiting lists. The Nautilus in steel? You'd have better odds winning the lottery, but Patek's real power isn't scarcity, it's influence. When Patek Philippe decides a trend matters, the entire industry follows. In 1976, they released the Nautilus, a luxury sports watch in stainless steel, designed by Gerald Genta. At the time, steel sports watches were considered low-end. Today, they're the most sought-after category in watchmaking. Patek set that trend. When they introduce a new complication, it becomes the benchmark. When they auction a watch, it breaks records. In 2019, a Patek Grandmaster chime sold for $31 million. That's not just a watch. That's a Picasso you wear on your wrist. And here's the kicker. Their slogan is, "You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation." That's not marketing, that's a philosophy. Patek isn't selling watches. They're selling heirlooms, and because they're independent, they move at their own pace. No quarterly earnings calls, no shareholders demanding growth. Just pure, patient, uncompromising watchmaking. That's real power. Audemars Piguet. Can you imagine a watch brand that makes only 50,000 pieces a year but generates $2.5 billion in revenue? That's an average selling price of $50,000 per watch. Welcome to Audemars Piguet, the rebel that became royalty. Founded in 1875 by Jules Louis Audemars and Edward Auguste Piguet in Le Brassus, Switzerland, AP spent nearly a century as a respected but relatively unknown manufacturer. They made complicated watches for collectors who cared about movements, not brand names. Then, 1972 happened. Gerald Genta, the same designer who created Patek's Nautilus, designed the Royal Oak for AP. A luxury sports watch in stainless steel with an octagonal bezel, exposed screws, and an integrated bracelet. It cost as much as a gold dress watch. The industry thought it was commercial suicide. Customers disagreed. The Royal Oak became a cultural phenomenon transcending horology and becoming a status symbol. Rappers started wearing them. Athletes, tech billionaires. A P didn't just make watches anymore, they made flexes. And like Patek, AP remains family-owned. The Audemars and Piguet families still control the company, which means total independence. No corporate overlords, no pressure to scale. They produce around 50,000 watches per year and refuse to increase production. Walk into an AP boutique without a purchase history? Good luck getting a Royal Oak. The waiting lists are measured in years, not months. And AP doesn't care. Scarcity is their strategy. Here's the math that proves their power. $2.5 billion divided by 50,000 watches equals $50,000 average selling price. They're not playing the volume game, they're playing the exclusivity game. And they're dominating. AP controls the luxury sports watch market alongside Patek and Rolex. But unlike Rolex, which makes 1 million watches a year, AP keeps it boutique. Limited production, maximum desirability. It's like Supreme for billionaires. And because they're independent, they dictate terms. No one tells AP what to do. Omega. If you want to see the biggest example of how corporate empires control luxury watchmaking, there's no better case study than Omega. Founded in 1848 by Louis Brandt in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, Omega built a reputation for precision chronometers. In 1969, the Speedmaster became the first watch on the moon. Legendary status achieved. The Seamaster became James Bond's watch. Omega sponsors the Olympics. On the surface, they look like an independent powerhouse. They're not. Omega is owned by the Swatch Group, the largest watch conglomerate on Earth. When the quartz crisis nearly destroyed Swiss watchmaking in the 1970s and early 80s, Japanese brands like Seiko flooding the market with cheap, accurate quartz watches, Swiss brands collapsed. Thousands of watchmakers went bankrupt. It was the watchmaking apocalypse. Enter Nicholas Hayek. In 1983, he orchestrated a merger of struggling brands to form the Swatch Group. Omega was the crown jewel. Tissot, Longines, Hamilton, Blancpain, Breguet, all part of the empire. But here's what makes Swatch Group truly powerful. They also own ETA, the company that supplies movements to most of the Swiss watch industry. So while Omega now produces its own coaxial movements in-house, their parent company literally controls the heartbeat of Swiss watchmaking. When other brands beg for ETA movements, Omega's siblings get priority. That's not just an advantage, that's systemic dominance. Today, Omega generates over $2 billion annually, but they don't operate independently. The Swatch Group dictates strategy, pricing, distribution. Omega exists to generate revenue for the group, not to push boundaries. They're a powerful brand backed by an even more powerful empire. It's like being the best player on a championship team. You're great, but you're not calling the plays. Cartier. What if we told you one of the most iconic French luxury brands isn't controlled by the French at all? It's controlled by a South African billionaire most people have never heard of. That's Cartier, and here's how they quietly became a puppet in a global luxury empire. Founded in 1847 in Paris by Louis-François Cartier, the brand made crowns and tiaras for European royalty long before they made watches. When they entered watchmaking, they did it with style. The Santos in 1904, one of the first men's wristwatches created for aviator Alberto Santos Dumont. The Tank in 1917, inspired by WWI tanks. Designed so iconic they're still bestsellers over a century later. But Cartier isn't independent. It's owned by Richemont, the Swiss luxury conglomerate founded by South African billionaire Johann Rupert in 1988. And Richemont isn't just a holding company, it's a strategic empire. Rupert didn't just buy brands, he bought control over the entire luxury ecosystem. Along with Cartier, Richemont owns Jaeger-LeCoultre, Vacheron, Constantin, IWC, A. Lange and Söhne, Panerai, Piaget, Baume and Mercier, and more. Combined, Richemont controls around 20% of the global luxury watch market and generates over 20 billion euros in annual revenue. Cartier alone contributes over $3 billion to that total, making it one of Richemont's biggest earners. But that also means Cartier answers to corporate overlords. They get access to Richemont's movement supplier, Val Fleurier, and benefit from massive distribution networks. But they don't control their own destiny. Richemont does. When Richemont decides Cartier needs to expand into China, Cartier expands. When Richemont decides Cartier should focus on jewelry watch hybrids, that's what happens. Cartier is a beautifully dressed puppet. Tag Heuer. Tag Heuer is the motorsports icon. Steve McQueen wore the Monaco. Formula One partnerships, racing pedigree everywhere. But in 1999, LVMH bought Tag Heuer for $739 million. And the brand became a soldier in a much larger war. Founded in 1860 by Edward Heuer in Switzerland, the brand built its reputation on precision chronographs. Heuer stopwatches timed the Olympics. Heuer dashboard timers appeared in race cars. The Monaco, worn by Steve McQueen in Le Mans, became a legend. Tag Heuer screamed speed, performance, and cool. But when LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, the largest luxury conglomerate on earth, bought TAG, everything changed. LVMH generates over 86 billion euros in annual revenue. They own Louis Vuitton, Dior, Moet, Hennessy, Tiffany & Company, and dozens of other brands. When they bought Tag Heuer, it wasn't to compete with Rolex or Patek Philippe. It was to dominate the accessible luxury segment. Tag Heuer sits in the $2,000 to $6,000 range, making Swiss watchmaking attainable for young professionals, enthusiasts, and people who want a real watch without a mortgage. And with LVMH's resources, massive marketing budgets, global retail presence, celebrity endorsements, Tag exploded. But here's the strategy. Volume. While Patek makes 60,000 watches and Richard Mille makes 5,500, Tag Heuer produces hundreds of thousands. They're not trying to be exclusive, they're trying to be everywhere. Airports, malls, online, boutiques. Tag is the gateway drug to luxury watches. Tag generates close to $1 billion annually for LVMH. But they're not calling the shots. LVMH is. Tag Heuer is a soldier in Bernard Arnault's luxury empire, executing a strategy designed in Paris, not Switzerland. Richard Mille. Richard Mille is the outlier, the disruptor, the brand that showed up in 2001 and said, "I'm making watches that cost more than Ferraris," and somehow made it work. Founded by Richard Mille and Dominique Guenard, the brand's philosophy was simple: extreme technology, extreme price, extreme exclusivity. The first watch, the RM001, launched at $150,000. People thought it was a joke. Rafael Nadal wore an $800,000 Richard Mille during Grand Slam matches. That kind of absurdity became aspirational. Richard Mille uses materials from Formula One and aerospace, carbon TPT, titanium, sapphire cases. Their watches are built like F1 cars for your wrist. And they're not subtle. Richard Mille watches are instantly recognizable. Tonneau cases, skeletonized dials, visible mechanics. They scream wealth. Today, Richard Mille produces only 5,500 watches per year at an average price of over $200,000. Do the math. That's over $1 billion in revenue from 5,500 pieces. They've mastered the art of making less and charging more. But Richard Mille isn't fully independent. In 2013, Kering, the French luxury conglomerate that owns Gucci, Saint Laurent, and Balenciaga, bought a minority stake. Richard Mille still operates with significant autonomy. Kering doesn't micromanage, but they're not fully in control. They have a corporate backer with deep pockets and global reach. Richard Mille is a brilliant disruptor, but with Kering's support, not despite it. It's like being an indie artist who signed with a major label. You keep creative control, but you're not truly independent. So here's the truth. Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Audemars Piguet control the watch industry because they control themselves. Total independence, total vertical integration, total freedom. Omega, Cartier, and Tag Heuer are incredible brands, but they're owned by conglomerates with agendas far beyond watchmaking. And Richard Mille? A brilliant disruptor playing by different rules, but still partially backed by Kering. Three brands sit at the head of the table, the rest are just following orders. Now you know who really runs the game. We hope you enjoyed this video. Here's another one you'll love. As always, thanks for watching.